Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I'm glad you could join me. Make sure to follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, be sure to follow me on social media at P.A.S. Report and share this episode with 3 to 4 people you know. The more you share it, the more people become aware of the problems that are plaguing the country. And I want to start today with a simple but uncomfortable question. You know, when we look at the United States, when we look at everything that's going on, when did we stop being such a serious country? And I mean that. I don't mean it rhetorically. I'm being serious about this. When did we reach the point where institutions no longer do the basic things that they exist to do, where failure is constantly normalized, where excuses are accepted, they're automatic, and accountability is non-existent? It's something I've been harping on for the last several years. Because if you look honestly at what happened over the past year, but also the past 3 decades, one pattern keeps repeating itself. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about government, higher education, healthcare, public safety. It seems that the people in charge are not up to the task. And the sad part is no one seems embarrassed by it anymore. They accept it. They're proud of it almost. This isn't about ideology. It's not about left versus right. It's about competency. And America is experiencing a crisis of it, because let's start with something tangible, something that we saw earlier this year. Look at what happened in the Pacific Palisades. Massive wildfires tearing through communities, homes destroyed, families displaced, lives upended. Natural disasters happen. We know that. Fires happen. No one's going to dispute that. But here's the real failure, the aftermath. Months later, we're almost a year now out. Nothing's rebuilt. You have endless permitting delays. You have this bureaucratic paralysis that exists in California, just layers upon layers of bureaucracy, environmental reviews, zoning disputes, regulatory bottlenecks. It's crazy. Everyone involved, yet no one's responsible. I mean, look at the fraud governor of California, Gavin Newsom. Here's a guy that last week put a post out on X how maybe Californians should start to withhold federal taxes. It really is astonishing. This is the same guy that's presiding over a failed state. And yes, California is a failed state. It should be one of the most powerful states. It's got what? The 4th, 5th, 6th largest economy in the world? But it's a friggin' disaster there because of government, because of regulation, and because of incompetency. California likes to think of itself as the pinnacle, the example of modern governance. But when it's faced with a basic test, I mean, this is part of the government's basic responsibilities. It failed. And it wasn't because of Mother Nature. It was because of governance. It was because of people like Gavin Newsom. Amazing. And yet he is the front runner in the Democratic primary. Now, a competence system would be able to clear the obstacles during emergencies. An unserious one creates the obstacles in an emergency, and that's what he's done. It shows up time and time again. Last week, we all watched the Brown University situation unfold. You have this elite institution, multi-billion-dollar endowment. I heard upwards of $8 billion endowment, endless committees and layers of administrators and bureaucracy. We have all these so-called experts coming from this Ivy League. And yet when a violent gunman came on campus, entered a classroom, killed students, injured students, the response was mixed messages, confusion, delays, institutional paralysis. You had administrators getting angry that they were being asked questions, particularly about the cameras that were on campus, that many of them were actually turned off and non-functioning. And yet when this violent incident unfolded, the response was a disaster. This isn't your underfunded community college that doesn't have the resources to really tackle these types of things. This is one of the most prestigious universities in the world, an institution that claims that it has a moral and intellectual authority over the country, and it couldn't handle a crisis on its own campus. That's not bad luck, that's rot. These institutions are filled with people who have credentials, okay? And they go out there, they parse their language very carefully, They push this ideological agenda on everyone, but their capacity to lead is non-existent. Yet they keep on getting appointed because we got to check those boxes. And that's the key distinction. We didn't stop selecting people based on intelligence. We stopped selecting people based on competency. And competence is practical. It's outcome-based. It's the ability to make decisions, take responsibility. It's the ability to act under pressure. And what replaced it is something else entirely. It's this idea that there's no consequences anymore. We now have systems where failure carries no cost, where administrators issue statements instead of actually providing leadership, where they manage optics and there's no results. And then we could look at government and government oversight and look at what happened in Minnesota. You have multiple state programs that were targeted for fraud, massive fraud. We're talking billions of dollars, taxpayer money, industrial scale. This didn't happen overnight. It was subtle. It was happening for years, and it was a sophisticated operation. It was obvious, though. And the system failed to stop it. Why? Why? Because it was being conducted at the hands of the Somalis? We have to acknowledge that. We can't deny that. People be like, oh, you're racist for bringing that up. No, we're talking billions of dollars of hard-earned taxpayer money being fraudulently stolen from the American people. And when it all comes out, you have all these politicians that are seeking cover. No one taking accountability. No one taking responsibility for it because it was politically uncomfortable. They didn't want to look like they were targeting a particular group of people. But I'm sorry, common sense. When billions of dollars is being stolen from the American people, you take the scam ring down and you do it immediately and you come out there and you admit what took place. You try and recover the money. And more importantly, you admit that there's a problem in our immigration system. It's not hard to do. It's not saying that every immigrant is bad, everyone who comes here is bad. It's saying we don't want people coming here that are going to be scamming the system, that are going to be stealing taxpayer dollars, that have this disdain for the United States, that will openly be hostile towards the United States, some even calling for its downfall. That's just common sense. But this is the result of unserious governance. That's what it comes down to. You know, fraud doesn't flourish because criminals are geniuses. It flourishes because no one wants to actually do oversight, and when they do some sort of oversight, when they do find scams in the system, they try and excuse those scams. It's limited. It's small. It's a drop in the bucket. So what we're watching is a collapse. It's a collapse of our system. And you want to add to that, we can look at our culture. You have so many people that don't want to talk about the real problems that exist. So many people that don't want to enforce standards within a society. You have these officials that are afraid to act decisively, and all they want to do is bow down to a toxic ideology. And what do you get in the process? You get a government that's massive and a government that's ineffective, both at the same time. Now, that combination is lethal. And then you look at professional collapse. I mean, I'm going back to Minnesota because there's just so many examples. You know, the statements made by Police Chief Brian O'Hara comparing federal immigration enforcement to the Nativity story, to Mary and Joseph, criticizing ICE agents for actually just doing their job, enforcing the laws that Congress passed. That's not just inappropriate, it's unserious. I can't take this public safety official seriously and understand this. Our public safety officials are not paid to make ideological metaphors. They're paid to uphold the law and protect the public. And if they're unable to do that, they should be removed from their position immediately. Because when leaders in critical roles speak this way, it signals something deeper, that activism has replaced professionalism. And that's why we're seeing the evaporation of trust within all institutions, from the local level to the federal level. This is what ties all the examples I just provided together. And it's not just failure, it's the absence of urgency, the lack of shame, the refusal to admit mistakes, the insulation from any consequence. Nowhere better can you find that than with Lord Fauci over the years. Now, in a healthy system, failure would equal reform. You see the failures, you see the defects that exist, and you reform it. In an unhealthy one, what does failure produce? It produces promotions and raises and being elected to office. And that's where we are as a country. See, America didn't lose its competency overnight. It's been slowly eroding as merit gave way to this idea of identity. Seriousness gave way to virtue signaling. We built institutions that can protect themselves, they're good at that. Institutions that will reward bad behavior, but institutions that are actually terrible at serving the public. And that's why these institutions exist in the first place. And the part that should worry everyone, if this is how our institutions perform during crises, when it comes to fires or fraud that gets uncovered, campus security, basic governance functions, what happens when the crisis is real? What happens when it rises to a level where it's going to require serious leadership? What happens when the stakes are much more national? If we can't handle the basics, if we reward failure, what's going to happen? How does America survive that? I don't think it can survive that. We're not talking about isolated incidents or mistakes. These are examples, but there are many more examples I could use where we're not just talking about a few bad actors. This is a large group of people within the country. And the governing class has certainly forgotten to govern. You have some of the most incompetent, inept people in positions of power, and it really is scary. So when we come back, I want to walk you through a couple of things this past year, and it's evidence of how the crisis of competence became normalized and why so many Americans no longer trust the institutions, but at the same time, Americans still demand more government involvement. It's a bizarre situation. So everyone, hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the P.A.S. Report podcast. Now, if you're enjoying the episode so far, make sure to do me a favor and leave a quick review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Give us a 5-star rating. Share this episode with 3 to 4 other people. That could be the Christmas present. And today, we are talking about the crisis of competency in America. And when you step back, when you look at this past year, honestly, again, I said it, decades ago, this crisis of competency started, but the past year was really eye-opening. We can't ignore the obvious. The failures that we've been discussing, they're not random, they're not unlucky moments or isolated incidents, they're patterns. And once failure repeats itself across institutions or geographical boundaries, we see it state to state, local government to local government. We see it in just about every sector. It's not a coincidence. You're dealing with a system that is broken, that doesn't work as it is intended. And ask yourself a simple question. How many do you know who are satisfied after dealing with the government? Because this is where it gets really bizarre. Whether it's permits, benefits, oversight, public safety, basic services, filling potholes, whatever it may be. It's usually frustration when you're dealing with the government. That's the norm, not the exception. No one ever walks away after dealing with the government saying, oh, that was such a pleasant experience. I wish I could do that more. Yet despite all of this, despite the failures, so many people call for more government, more authority, more power. You want to talk about a disconnect, there's your disconnect, and it should concern everyone because the same institutions that struggle to perform their most basic functions are the same ones constantly asking for expanded control over our lives, and people out there are all too willing to give them more power. And when things go wrong, we all hear the same familiar language, oh, it's complicated. Oh, these things take time. Oh, there are processes that we must follow. The language, it's like the universal excuse for inaction. But notice something important. That language disappears the moment the government wants to regulate you. It disappears the moment the government wants to tax you or restrict your behavior in some way. Suddenly, that's when you see urgency appear. That's when you see them be decisive. That's when you see them, quote unquote, take on leadership. It's amazing. Talk about priorities. And the problem is that we have so many people out there that are unable to think for themselves. They're unable to think critically. All they do is they go by these sound bites of what they hear. They go to whoever they listen to, and that's what they run with. But when it comes to competency, when it comes to government performing their most basic functions, protecting the public, safeguarding taxpayer dollars, maintaining basic order, simple things, the government can't deliver. It's pathetic. So why would we want to give them more power? Why would we want to give them more authority, more control over our lives? Because when it comes to exerting control, it moves with remarkable speed and it expands those powers and it tells you everything you need to know. But so many are so blinded. They have their heads buried in the sand. They don't really see what's going on. And the government operates under an incentive structure that rewards failure instead of results. The people who preside over the breakdowns are not removed from office. They're not voted out of office. They're recycled. They're reelected. They're reappointed. They're promoted. I mean, just look at Chicago. You have over 100 years of Democratic leadership. What has it got in Chicago? Is Chicago better today than it was 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago? Is Chicago in a better position? No. I mean, think about this logically. What has Chicago done? So Lori Lightfoot voted out, and what do the people do? They elect Brandon Johnson. They despise Brandon Johnson. I think he has like a 13% approval rating as mayor. And what are they going to do next time? Maybe they'll reelect him, or maybe they're just going to elect someone that's just as bad or even worse. I didn't think you could get worse than Lori Lightfoot, but Brandon Johnson proved that one wrong. So it amazes me, and we're part of the problem because we're the ones that preside over the system. Yet we see failure after failure, and we just allow it to take place. No accountability. You look at government oversight, massive fraudulent schemes being exposed. We have Doge come in, and they're able to find a lot of fraud and abuse that's taking place. And even then, what do we see? Well, the response is tepid. Hardly any of the Doge cuts have been really institutionalized. I think something like several $billion maybe. That's it. Why? There's no urgency, no outrage, no accountability. Instead, we see deflection. That's what we see time and time again. Deflection. It really is amazing. When we point that out, when it's exposed, nothing happens. Nothing happens. It's demoralizing. The Somali fraud network is such a great example because the criticism isn't addressed. It's dismissed. It's moralized in some sort of way. It's bizarre. And understand, fraud doesn't happen in a vacuum. It occurs where they know they could take advantage of the system. Yes, a few people got caught. And yes, they got sent to prison. But this was going on for years, and how many billions of American dollars went overseas, went to terrorist organizations? We have no idea, and we'll never know, and we'll never be able to recoup that money. And yet, nobody seems to care. See, a serious government understands that oversight is not optional. It understands that taxpayer money is not abstract. It understands that real money earned by real people demand that it gets protected, but we're not demanding it. So are we a serious people? We have to ask that question. Or are we a people that just operate strictly through emotion, strictly through sound bites? We have a government class, this elite, that prefers things like political correctness, plausible deniability. They don't take responsibility for anything, and that dynamic plays out all across the board. I mean, look at the education system. I mean, this year reinforced what many parents already know instinctively, and every single one of you that listen to the program knows it. You have schools that are no longer focused on education as a core mission. That system's dead. These now are bureaucratic systems designed to process and cycle students through the system. They don't develop the students. We have another year, historically low proficiency levels, critical thinking eroding, ideological agendas crowding out the fundamentals, and yet education budgets continue to grow. Nobody's held accountable, trillions spent, and what's our return on that investment? What's our return on investment when we spend trillions of dollars and yet our education system has collapsed? You look at the college campuses that allowed situations to metastasize over the last few years. You had students taking over buildings, students assaulting other students. And it took years for college administrators to respond. And when crises emerge on college campuses, whether it's violence or disorder, whether you have ideological extremism, administrators, they put out these milquetoast statements because they don't want to offend anyone. And if anyone asks them the tough questions, they attack those people. You have leadership being replaced by process, and we just want to put check marks in boxes. How is the Brown University president still president? How is the chief of security or police, whatever they're called on Brown University, how is that person still in a position of power? I don't know. It's certainly not based on competency, that's for sure, and that's why things get worse. And then we look at the media. Not in a lazy sense of bias. I've spoken about media bias before. I think every conservative has spoken about media bias. But I'm talking about in a far more serious sense, that we have a press that no longer practices journalism at all, a press that doesn't care about truth, a media class. I mean, if anyone thinks that The media as it exists today is committed to truth, consistency, or accountability. You're fooling yourselves. The media has become nothing more than tribal actors, outlets that exist to protect their side and attack the other side. I mean, that's where we are. And nowhere is this clearer than in how they suddenly discovered concerns over presidential fitness and abuses of power. Think about this logically. For years, the same voices that insisted that Joe Biden was perfectly fine. Not only was Joe Biden capable, but he was sharp, he was focused, he was at the top of his game. We were told concerns about his cognitive decline were conspiracy theory. It was disinformation, nothing more than right-wing smears. People mocked, censored, dismissed for noticing what was visible to anyone that was paying attention. And we have to tape some of the most egregious statements, right? Joe Scarborough going on television saying it's the best Biden ever. The best Biden ever. He's still in his position. You have Jake Tapper that wrote a whole book about Biden's cognitive decline, only he wrote it after Biden left office, not when Biden was in office. Truly stunning. That wasn't analysis. It's not journalism. This is narrative enforcement. Chuck Todd coming out, calling about the threats to democracy and the collapse of the press. Chuck Todd got information from a cabinet-level secretary in 2022 that Biden could not run for re-election. He wasn't cognitively capable. Chuck Todd held on to that information until the first debate with President Trump, and then he said it. And he still hasn't released who was the cabinet official that said it. So years after years of gaslighting the public, these same outlets suddenly, they want to have a serious conversation about age, health, and fitness. But only because Donald Trump is back in the picture. See, there was no reckoning in the media, no accountability. Sure, they lost some ratings, but they didn't have good ratings to begin with. However, their viral video clips did take off online, and we have to understand that. They do have influence still. And it gets worse because these same media figures who were largely silent when the Biden administration used the machinery of government, the arsenal of government to target political opponents and ordinary Americans, they were silent when federal agencies coordinated with tech companies and suppressed speech. They were silent when parents were treated as potential domestic threats. Silence when Catholics were surveilled, and they were silent on the national strategy for countering domestic terrorism, and that was the main vehicle that was used to justify monitoring lawful political dissent, targeting ordinary Americans. Those weren't hypotheticals. Those aren't rumors. This isn't me saying it. These are documented actions of the previous administration. I've broken down many times here how the government abused its power, and I used their own documents, their own emails, their own communications to show it. Yet you didn't see wall-to-wall coverage. You didn't see any breathless concerns about the national strategy, not even among conservatives or the Republican outlets. There was no moral panic going on. But now, the same press that looked the other way when it came to the national strategy and the targeting of ordinary Americans, now they have the audacity to clutch their pearls and warn about the dangers to democracy, Trump being the next Mussolini, that authoritarianism is here. I read this whole piece in Foreign Affairs magazine. It was a trash piece about how Donald Trump turned this country authoritarian. No, he didn't. The truth is the bureaucracy did. That's the truth. And they don't want to admit it. Now, once in that article did it bring up an example of how over the course of the last 30 years, the bureaucracy has become more authoritarian. And it's that hypocrisy that has led to the collapse in trust that people have in the media. Journalism is supposed to scrutinize power consistently, not selectively. I don't care who's in power. It's supposed to apply the same standards regardless of who's in office. But what do we see? We see standards shift based on partisan alignment. And when the press behaves in this way, you have a lot of misinformed people out there because what it's doing is protecting the incompetence that exists within government. It protects the abuse of power that at the hands of these incompetent buffoons. But more importantly, it teaches those in power that as long as they're on the correct side, they're not going to get questioned. They're not going to be challenged. They're not going to be held accountable. And that dynamic is central to why the failures we've been discussing here were allowed to persist for the last few decades, including this year. When there is no honest press to apply pressure, you start to see the institutional decay, and that's been going on for a while. The result that we have now is nobody trusts anything anymore. You have a public that no longer trusts what it's told, a public that no longer trusts its institutions. And it's not because we're cynical, right? I brought up earlier how many of us don't even think critically anymore. But it's because people only want to hear what they want to hear. They only want their opinions validated. And they don't mind that they were lied to repeatedly. So we have this credibility issue, and it's the core feature of this crisis of incompetence that we're seeing. A system that no longer tolerates truth, instead it tolerates failure. That protects the corrosion, the rot we're witnessing amongst our institutions, but also in our culture as well. And trust doesn't collapse all at once. It's gradually eroded throughout the years. So again, I ask, how long can a country stand if nobody believes anything that's going on in it? How long can a country stand if people don't know the very basic premise of their civic responsibilities? How long can a country stand if people don't trust the officials they put in office but continually reelect them? And so it's bizarre. And unfortunately, America is increasingly governed by people who are insulated from the consequences of their failures. In fact, they could fail time and time again. They don't lose position. They don't lose their influence. They don't even lose credibility. Instead, what do we see? We see them get appointed to higher positions. We see them get promoted. We see them become more influential. We see them go sit on corporate boards. It really is a situation that's not sustainable, because when a system fails long enough, when people begin to disengage, when people stop trusting, when no one's cooperating, when no one believes anything they're hearing or seeing, that's the real danger that we're facing. And we now have a system where there's a lot of illegitimacy that exists, which brings us to the final question. What happens next? Why do even those who campaigned on reform, why have they struggled to deliver it? Because this isn't just about Democrats. A lot of people, oh, you're partisan, you're only talking about Democrats. No, this is about Republicans as well. We're talking about all leadership across the board. And that's what I want to turn to in the final segment. So hang tight, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the P.A.S. Report podcast. Make sure to click that follow button so you never miss an episode, and share this episode with 3 to 4 other people, because now we get to the very uncomfortable part of the conversation. I know many of my listeners out there, they're Republicans, they're conservatives. A lot of them are independents. We have some Democrats that listen to this show, and I love when they do. I have no problem with people of the other political side listening. I even have some far lefties who we may disagree politically, but I've gotten to know some of them. They're nice people. But we're going to get to the uncomfortable part. Because if this was just a story about Democrats, if it was just a story about bureaucrats in the media, it would be too easy. I mean, that's what any commentator can do, that on the conservative side. But the truth is, Republicans are not immune from the crisis of competence. In some ways, I think that's what scares me more. Because Republicans don't campaign as the party that wants to expand government. They don't campaign as the party that wants to spend more money. They don't campaign as the party that wants the nanny state. They campaign as the party of restraint, right? The party of accountability and fiscal responsibility, the party that believes in constitutional limits, that believes in the United States Constitution. So they concern me even more when they fail to act. And when they fail to act, it matters more, because let's start with something simple. Let's just look at the Epstein files and how the Epstein files were handled. I mean, rather than releasing everything immediately when Trump first came into office and just letting the chips fall where they may, you had the administration that hesitated, they delayed, and they tried to manage the rollout. This caused enormous damage to President Trump himself. It was a disservice to him. And the fact that he didn't take control of it, it hurt him. Because let's face it, a large part of their base wanted to see those files released in the first part of his administration, the first few months. And they didn't want to be told, well, if you don't toe the line that the Epstein files are just a hoax, well, then you're not real MAGA. That did irreparable harm to this administration. And not only did it do irreparable harm to the administration, not only did President Trump lose support, but the hesitation created a massive opening. It allowed Democrats in the media to begin to shape the Epstein narrative. It fueled distrust. It undercut a clear campaign promise that could have been resolved decisively. And now here we are. The files are being released anyway. But the damage from the delay, the perception of secrecy, that's irreversible in my opinion. And it wasn't a legal failure. It wasn't a technical failure. It was a competence failure. How they didn't see that coming is beyond me. In a moment that demanded clarity and decisiveness, the instinct was caution and control the flow of information. And we saw that under previous administrations. It's part of the reason that people voted for President Trump, because he was the outsider. He was willing to take on the system. Look at the FBI. I mean, after years of documented abuse, whether it's surveillance of ordinary Americans, political targeting, targeted whistleblowers, what have we seen when it comes to real structural reform? And don't anyone tell me out there, well, reform takes time. No, it doesn't. Reform can happen pretty quickly if you have the will to do it. Have we seen the apparatus dismantled? Have we seen the apparatus that abused its power restrained at all? And the answer is no. You still have that same culture that exists in the FBI today that existed 4 years ago, 8 years ago, 12 years ago, 16 years ago, 20 years ago. You have that same leadership culture. You have the same internal incentives that led to the abuses still intact. You have the same lack of accountability within the FBI today. Even the national strategy for countering domestic terrorism. This is a framework that I have focused on since its release in June of 2021. This was the framework that was explicitly used to justify monitoring lawful Americans, yet it remains fully intact. And that should alarm everyone, because if abuses are acknowledged, everyone acknowledges that abuses of power took place, yet the systems that enabled them remain untouched, then what has changed? What has changed? And does it really matter who is in office? To me, it's you have this optic and there's no reform. And that brings us to the broader problem I'm seeing amongst Republicans today. You know, too often leadership seems more concerned with managing appearances than doing the hard, unglamorous work of dismantling this abusive structures that exist within our institutions. And I get it. Reform isn't flashy. Reform's not something that's going to win you elections. Reform isn't going to produce viral clips. And I also understand that reform doesn't satisfy everyone. President Trump, one of the great things he's done is that he started to reduce the federal workforce. Too many bureaucrats doing too much of the same jobs that aren't needed, overly redundant, and yet people are mad about that. So it doesn't satisfy everyone, and initially, any reforms can be painful. I'll acknowledge that. We can feel pain with certain reforms. But reforms matter. And when it doesn't happen, the obvious question is why? And the answer is power. You have these institutions that wield enormous authority, enormous budgets, enormous influence. And once the same people that were criticizing it, they gain access to that power, what happens? They no longer have the incentive to rein that agency in. It's easier to criticize the system when you're not a part of it. But when you become a part of it, then it becomes much more difficult. So you have promises that were made, and now they collide with the comfort of control and the ambition for power. That's not a partisan observation. I'm admitting that this is a human one. And both Republicans and Democrats are guilty of it. But I don't give anyone a pass for it, including Republicans, just because I feel like I'm lost in the wilderness. That's what I feel. I align, obviously, more with the Republicans. I do identify as a conservative. But I don't give a pass to Republicans. Doesn't matter if it's Kash Patel in the FBI, Pam Bondi in the DOJ. Doesn't matter if it's President Trump. There are a lot of things I like he's doing. There are other things I despise what he's doing. I'll talk more about that in future episodes. But when Congress comes into the picture, that's when I get really aggravated, because we have a feckless Republican Congress. We talk about the 2026 midterm elections, and I think it's way too early for anyone to predict how they're going to go. I do believe that Republicans have a difficult climb. Historically, the odds are against Republicans retaining the House. Historically, the odds are against Republicans in the Senate. We know that usually the party in power during midterm elections gets voted out. That's what normally happens. But part of the problem that Republicans have today is that they're feckless. They don't do anything. I mean, where are the bills that Republicans have campaigned on for years? Where is the voter ID bill? Where is codifying some of Trump's executive orders? Where is codifying the stay in Mexico policy so that another administration can't undo Trump's executive order? Where are the bills that limit the administrative state, that restrain government spending, government power, that begin to reassert congressional authority over the bureaucracy? I mean, many of the things that I'm talking about, these should be easy layups for Republicans, and yet they go nowhere. Yeah, you may have some of the bills introduced, but what do we see? We see Congress devolving into internal squabbles, personality clashes, procedural paralysis. Now, I understand the realities of the Senate. I teach American government. Remember that. I understand the 60-vote threshold, and I understand divided government. Republicans want to get things through. A lot of times they need 7 Democrats to come on board. But here's the problem with that excuse. Even when a bill can't pass, you put it up for a vote. I don't care if it's not going to pass. Oh, don't waste time. There's no point in putting it up for a vote because it can't possibly pass. I don't care. You force clarity. You force accountability. You put members on record. And for anyone that says, well, Democrats will invoke the filibuster, well, then Republicans should invoke that it has to be a speaking filibuster. If Democrats want a filibuster, they have to go to the floor of the Senate and actually talk. They can no longer do the silent filibuster. And I don't believe in dismantling the filibuster either. I want to make that clear. What I'm trying to do is make Democrats defend their positions. They need to defend them to the voters. Democrats no plan. What are they talking about today? What's the Democrat solution? Take Trump out of the equation, take Trump's name out of it. What is the Democrat solution to the problems Americans are facing today? And they have nothing. Nothing. So make the Democrats defend their positions to voters. Force them to take positions on issues. That's how serious parties govern. That's how you apply pressure, and that's how you build momentum to at least try and put up a fight to maintain control of the House of Representatives and the United States Senate. Failure to even try isn't realism. It's an abdication of their responsibility, and this lack of seriousness isn't confined to elected officials. I mean, we have just witnessed an all-out brawl break out in the Republican Party. You have Republicans and conservatives. The entire ecosystem is now being challenged. You have this rift among Republican influencers who aren't really debating the merits of an issue. They're not really debating policy positions per se. Instead, what we're seeing is personal attacks. We're not seeing any real debate. We're hearing calls for cancellation, loyalty tests, purity. It's ironic, and not only is it ironic, I actually find it very disturbing to watch Republicans adopt the very tactics they spent years condemning on the Democrat side. They spent years condemning this idea of cancel culture. Now they're like, Republican, you're not saying what I like, we're canceling you. This isn't healthy disagreement. This isn't debate. The rift we're seeing is real, and sadly, it's about egos. That's why I don't like being friends with anyone, because I don't have an ego. Okay, as I told you, with the new contract with America, any politician could take it. They can make it as if they came up with the idea. They can run with it. I don't care about ego. But these people do. Why? Because this battle gets them more clicks, gets them more likes, more views. When they get more clicks, likes, and views, what do? They make more money. And so they have a vested interest in continuing this battle, this rift amongst Republicans, and there's just common sense positions. We are a Big Ten party. We're supposed to argue ideas. Instead, what are we doing? We see people destroying each other. We are supposed to channel our disagreements into policy, but instead now we're seeing the tribalism on the Republican side. The rival tribes that exist, and again, there's no real debate about it. It's just, who are you siding with? How's about I side with nobody? How's about I'm not going to take anyone's side? Whether it's Ben Shapiro, Tucker Carlson, whether it's Steve Bannon or Candace Owens. How's about I could just call them all out? I really don't care. If I agree with certain things that they say, I'll say it. But if I disagree with them, I'm not about ego. I don't care if people are bigger than me out there. I don't care. It doesn't make a difference to me. This isn't my bread and butter. That's what my college is for. That's where I make my money. Teaching my classes. That's what I enjoy doing the most. Talking to students, talking to that next generation, sparking discussion, debate, getting them to think critically. And that's what competency does. So when we look at that, the central question of the episode, competence, it's not about intelligence or ideology. It's about demonstrating execution. It's about the ability to think critically. It's about demonstrating leadership. It's about turning power into actual results, principles into actual policies. that the promises made become out. And right now, too many institutions, too many leaders, they fail the test. We could survive disagreement. America is based on disagreement. I always loved that idea about unity. Oh, we need to be unified. When were we ever unified politically? We were never unified. We could have political debates. We could disagree with each other. We could survive divided government. Divided government sometimes is better than a unified government. But what our country cannot survive is when our institutions no longer serve the people, when the leadership and people in positions of power are thoroughly incompetent across the board, not just in government, but in all institutions, all sectors. When the people disengage from the political process, when people believe the systems are incapable of reform and just accept the status quo, when that disengagement becomes widespread, I guarantee you that it's opening the door to a socialist takeover of the country. And that's exactly what will happen. That's the warning for all of you out there. The choice going forward is actually simple. It may be uncomfortable, but it is simple. We could continue rewarding failed leadership, or we could demand competence. We can accept optics and like what we're told because we get our opinions validated, or we could demand results. The choice is yours. You could cheer on the rhetoric, or you could judge performance. So that's what we could do. I am someone that believes we need standards, and standards have to apply to everyone, especially those who claim to stand against the system, that once you get put in these positions of power, you actually do something about it that you've been complaining about for several years. And I hope this episode resonates with you, because I know many of you feel it and see it out there. I mean, you email me, so I know. And share this with others, because if we don't begin to tackle the things that I mentioned, if we don't begin to implement that new contract with America, all we're doing is opening the door for the far left takeover of this country. They will capture this entire country. And it's not going to be, 20 years down the road or 30 years down the road. It's going to be pretty soon. Now, I'll talk more about that following the Christmas break, and on Wednesday, I have a very special episode of the America's Founding series that you won't want to miss, and then that's going to do it for the year. The next week is New Year's week. The P.A.S. report will be going on hiatus until the new year, so you could catch up on previous episodes you may have missed. I encourage you to do so. I want to thank you for joining me, and don't forget to tune in on Wednesday for a special America's Founding series episode that I will promise you will enjoy it.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.